Hey, are you gonna be okay to film the perfunctory Christmas special? Greetings, Bloodclaws, and welcome to Codex Compliant, the series where we take a look at the various codices, magazines, and general stuff Games Workshop has put out over the years.
Since it's the season for snow and giant terrifying men with beards, we thought we'd take a look at 1994's Codex Space Wolves.
In ages past, the mighty Primarch Leman Russ led the Space Wolves chapter of Space Marine Warriors. He was unsurpassed for ferocity in battle, and no chapter was as headstrong and battle-keen.
As you can probably tell given how the cover displays all the colours, this codex is from 40k's 2nd edition. Also, this wolf pelt looks less like a pelt and more like a wolf that has stolen a knife and refuses to come down from there. Granted, that's not the only thing that's weird on the cover. Like the chainsaw that's shooting out red lightning, or this marine who is so checked out he's not even looking at what he's shooting.
Anyway, this codex was given to us by our friend and podcast co-host, Drummer Matt, because that's just the sort of thing that he'd do. There's no joke there, he's just a nice guy like that. Cheers, Matt.
So, the Space Wolves, the Viking-themed wolf-liking space marine chapter from the frozen death world of Fenris. They started off as just another marine chapter in the Rogue Trader rulebook, back when Leman Russ looked like this and was just some dude. By the time of this codex, they had morphed into more or less what they are now, gaining the Viking theme and going from grey to blue, despite many authors still referring to them as grey in their writing, just to be confusing. Also, they are the army that I play, and so are the best faction in the entirety of Warhammer 40,000.
Do you think that you might want to go for a slightly more nuanced stance than that?
I do not.
Since the 2nd edition books were, well, just straight up better than their 3rd edition replacements, there are multiple pages of steaming hot lore right out the gate. As previously mentioned, most of it is more or less still accurate, with just a few bits here and there that don't really fit into the modern versions, like when it talks about the Primarchs. Each Primarch was created differently, with his own unique powers. Some of the Primarchs were made so as to resemble ordinary humans, but many were of titanic proportions and strange appearance. Which does sort of suggest that some of them would have just been regular person-sized. A novel idea from a modern perspective, but then if you remember how tiny the old Russ model was, and all this starts to make a little more sense. Also in the land of things that got changed later, Wolf Scouts aren't old veterans in this book. They're just like the Scouts of any other chapter made up of novitiates not yet made into full Astartes. Although their sergeants did get some pretty neat unique models, which meant they didn't have to entirely use the regular Scout models of the era, which were, well, weren't great.
Speaking of dodgy looking models, another thing you might notice is that the Wolfen Curse is way less of a big deal here. It's still referenced from time to time, but it's really just their bestial side that they have to overcome in order to become full Space Marines. So we don't have to deal with this, which is nice. The Great Companies are a little different too, as they weren't set in stone. You get it, because they're literally set in... forget it. Granted, Ragnar and Grimnar's Great Companies are explicitly shown, but all the other symbols are shown only as examples for you to use in creation of your own Great Companies. And that's pretty great, since as much as we like the modern wolves, they are a little restrictive. The wolves had no successor chapters, aside from the ill-fated Wolf Brothers, and if you wanted to have your army be set in present day, then there are just 13 companies to choose from. So if you wanted to make your own take on the wolves, you're gonna have to get pretty loose with the canon. Granted, you can make a Primaris successor now, but, you know, it's not quite the same.
After all the fluff, we get something pretty unique, a full bat rep, and we're pretty sure this is the only time they ever did this, in a codex anyway, they do it in White Dwarf all the time. This one is a battle between Jervis Johnson using Ghazghkull Thracker's Warband and a very Lemmy looking Andy Chambers using Ragnar Blackmane's Space Wolves. The studio version of Ragnar Blackmane at the time was blonde, by the way, which just looks a little weird now we're used to seeing him with black hair all the time.
The Space Wolves win, of course. It's their book, so it'd be a bit strange if they didn't, I suppose. To be fair, that's probably the reason that they didn't really do this again. You can't exactly have the army that the Codex is for lose the game, since that wouldn't exactly encourage people to play them. But as this was the first generation of codexes, they were bound to do a bit of experimentation to see what worked and what didn't.
Moving on to the crunch side of things, the Wolves had a few interesting special rules. Acute senses meant that they could spot enemies who were hiding from twice the usual distance, and hatred, specifically hatred for the Thousand Suns because some things never change, which ties into Second Ed's hatred mechanic that, amongst other things, lets you re-roll your attack dice when you first attack a hated foe.
As for the units available, well, if you're familiar with the modern Space Wolves, then most of what's in here won't surprise you. You've got your Blood Claws, your Grey Hunters, your Long Fangs, your Wolf Scouts, your Wolf Guard, and all the people who get to boss them around. Also, vehicles. As for stuff in here not available in the current codex, you have rapier laser destroyers and tarantula turrets. There were large guns manned by servitors you could take if you had an Iron Priest, and are really just a Forge World thing these days. There's a variety of Rune Priests, starting at Rune Scald all the way up to Rune Lord, depending on exactly how jacked you want your priest to be. You can also take allied troops from any Space Marine list, the Imperial Guard, Imperial Agents, Squats or Eldar, except the Avatar. Nobody likes him. Although considering how open play is in 8th edition, I guess you can totally have allies like that now too, just with less squats and no Avatar-based restrictions.
One thing that is a little surprising, since they feel like they've been around forever, is that there are no playable wolves in this codex, as in the big furry variety, not the space variety. Being able to field actual literal wolves in a mainline Space Wolves codex only started in 3rd edition, and even then it was only in a bodyguard kind of role. So in here, no Fenrisian wolves, no cyber wolves, no thunder wolves, and Grimnar has to walk rather than use his wolf-powered Santa sleigh.
Hey, there we go. Hey. A very tenuous but real link to Christmas. See? We know what we're doing.
Whilst on the subject of named characters, the special characters in this book are Ulrich the Slayer, Niall Stormcaller, Bjorn the Fell-Handed, Logan Grimnar, and Ragnar Blackmane, who get 7 attack dice on the charge due to his Berserk charge rule. For frame of reference, Ulrich the Slayer would get 3. Although it's not quite as bad as it sounds, since in 2nd Ed Close Combat you had like attack dice and you picked the highest from them, and more dice meant more chances to fumble but also more chances to critical as well. Look, this is not the time or place to explain 2nd Ed's Close Combat, just rest assured, it was quite different. Anyway, on top of those folks, there were 3 more that were gone by the next codex, those being Wolfguard Durfast of Mordrak, Wolfguard Ranulf, and Wolflord Kjörl Grimblood. I'm sorry if I pronounced Kjörl wrong, even Google didn't know how to do it.
Durfast had a special helmet, imaginatively named the Helm of Durfast, that was basically an aimbot. The helm is still around as a piece of war gear actually, which is pretty neat. Wolfguard Ranulf was just really big, explicitly stated to be larger in girth than Leman Russ. Make of that what you will. And Wolflord Kjörl Grimblood, who is not to be confused with the current Wolflord Kjall Grimblood. Despite the similar names, they're 2 entirely different characters. For a start, Kjörl lived 5,000 odd years earlier during the Age of Apostasy. Now you'd think that the latter was just a retcon of the former, but no. Kjörl's lore was expanded back in a 2009 White Dwarf article, and he's still referenced in the 8th edition Space Wolf Codex that came out just a few months ago. So the names are similar just to be confusing, I guess? Oh, somewhat unrelated to the book we're talking about, but when else will we get to mention this? In the White Dwarf article that expands on Kjörl, it also has rules specifically for playing on the Space Wolves' home planet of Fenris. The weather can get so bad that, amongst other things, you have to roll for every unit on the table, and on a 2+ they take a wound. Which makes all of my complaining about the British winter seem a little bit silly now, I'm gonna admit.
As ever, for a 2nd edition codex, there is a catalogue in the bag, which is still useful to this day from a collector's standpoint anyway. It's also about as close as I'll ever get to the beauty, the majesty, the costs far too much off eBay-ness of the original Land Raider model. Someday, my love, someday.
So, that was the 1994 Codex Space Wolves, and I mean, what can we say about it except for it's the 2nd edition codex? And those are pretty great. Between the nostalgic artwork, the sagas, like this 5-page story about Ragnar Blackmane that we kinda forgot to mention until now, the old models and the bits and pieces to photocopy and use in-game, they still make for really interesting reads. So if you can, give it a look.
We're sorry. I suppose for a Christmas episode there wasn't really anything to do with the holidays in this codex, aside from Fenris being a little snowy, I suppose.
Warhammer 40,000? More like War on Christmas 40,000!
Why did you do that?
I just really don't like this cup.